Hello, welcome to Acts of Subversive Kindnesses 2 for February, and welcome to a noticeably brighter and hopefully more optimistic time. Perhaps some of you managed to find something useful behind last month's doors. Personally, my poem discovered 4 empty plinths beside a church entrance and deposited a group of welcoming hobgoblins there. I realised the need to be careful about the recipient of that poem, but I have that covered. You can never have too many hobgoblins. I'd like to open February's door into a dusty world that I call backstage. Rather like those doors, I reserve the right to view that word's spaces very flexibly. Travel with me now to a museum in Siena. Maybe Siena itself has been a bit upstaged by yon Florence down the Superstrada. And really, that's a pity. Extraordinary as Florence is, Siena's really special, as I found out one spring when I was 18. You've got to love a bit of Gothic early Renaissance. Bring on the Cimabues, the Fra Angelicos. But then again, you are 18, and even art students can be all duccioed out. And when one of your friends, destined for a career in textile design, beckons behind that fabulous freestanding tempera panel in the Pinoteca, you must follow, much to the curator's concern. But that's what happens with these textile people. And trust me, if you visit art school degree shows, and I hope you do, you really should, do stray from the painting show and find the textile students' notebooks and development work. You may like what's going on backstage more than what's spotlit in the display case. No department does, in my opinion, experimental notebooks better, more consistently than the textile ones. But meanwhile, back in Tuscany, what a work of woodworked engineering on the reverse side of that panel. Structure, colours, textures, utterly beautiful from a craft worker and designer's perspective. The kindly curator came behind with us and explained the delicate task of how the painting had been transferred from its terribly eroded panels to this specially designed support, and so was now able to be viewed in the 20th century. Clearly he was relieved that we were simply odd and not about to steal the masterpiece. And we really tried hard to follow his highly technical account in his rapid Italian before escaping to espressi and panforte. Why not go behind a facade soon? And we will return to Siena. But we're staying with textiles. The Observer used to run a wonderful feature on the back page of its colour supplement, The Expert's Expert. One week the focus was on film costume designers. Various designers gave their thoughts, but I think in this case their choice was unanimous. Fabio Toblini, who designed the magnificent costumes, and clothes really is a far too inadequate word here, for the 1989 film Dangerous Liaisons. Now, the research and the beauty of these period wonders seems self-evident to the point of ostentation, hardly backstage. But for me, the extraordinary twist in the praise was this. According to his peers, what made Toblini preeminent in his field was the fact that he designed everything. From the foundation garments onwards, no comfy M&S scants for Miss Pfeiffer. But seriously, the designer's respect was very studied. Glenn Close was a woman of the 1980s who moved as a modern woman does. Without that unseen detail, she would have walked, turned and bent entirely differently. The never-seen, generally unheralded underwear impacted on the authenticity of how she played her character. Taking that somewhere far more mundane, how many of us, as small people, received a doll as a present and pretty quickly turned it upside down to check it had been supplied with pants? I don't think children are especially prudish. It just seems something that doll manufacturers really needed to do. The doll was certainly diminished in my eyes without that consideration. As we shift into the quotidian, what about all those people backstage who make the performance happen? As my brother in a long past student job mentioned, you may want to reward your waiter in a cafe, but if the person doing the dishes doesn't make things happen and doesn't have a share of the tips, it's not always very fair. Tim Minchin gave an inspirational address entitled 9 Life Lessons to students graduating from the University of Western Australia. I've listened to it a few times, and I cry every time he mentions the contracts he has not signed with the big exec who failed to notice and thank the member of staff bringing the coffee and biscuits to the meeting. We need more Tim Minchins in our world. And perhaps the most famous poem, which celebrates the essence and importance of backstage support, is this by UA Fanthorpe. Justly famous, and I make no apologies for reading it again here. Atlas. There is a kind of love called maintenance, which stores the WD-40 and knows when to use it, which checks the insurance and doesn't forget the milkman, which remembers to plant bulbs, which answers letters, which knows the way the money goes, which deals with dentists and road fund tax and meeting trains and postcards to the lonely, which upholds the permanently rickety, elaborate structures of living, which is Atlas. And maintenance is the sensible side of love, which knows what time and weather are doing to my brickwork, insulates my faulty wiring, laughs at my dry, rotten jokes, remembers my need for gloss and grouting, which keeps my suspect edifice upright in the air, as Atlas did the sky. And that always makes me cry too. Now we have travelled to poems. I know many of you will be aware of the excellent Blood Axe Newcastle University lectures. If you have not read the Gwyneth Lewis one, it's certainly worth seeking out. An avowed formalist herself, she has some great things to say on the subject of poetic form, particularly closed forms. She talks about really loving working with the forward thrust of the narrative and the tension of the backwards pull of the line ending, citing that as the place where her creative magic really happens. I think that's an extraordinary and exciting statement. And anyone who has ever hated themselves enough to write a sestina will understand that. The first one I attempted was really dire. The second one came out accidentally. Okay, nobody writes a sestina accidentally. But I didn't set out to write it, and I was surprised to realise that the cyclical nature of the subject pushed for really demanded that form. With the right underpinning, the poem's difficult territory became much more possible to write. When I listen to examples of that form, I like it when I'm carried along by the structure. But the good grief, sestina moment doesn't happen immediately. That's perhaps a matter of personal taste. I like uncovering layers in a poem with repeated visits. And I'm less keen on poems where the formal structure, the rhyme scheme and the rhythm announce themselves a wee bit too boldly at the outset, and one or more of these components seem to enter the room before the poem. And that probably is just me. But how I love finding out how the backstage elements have made a poem. And we all have a backstage, of course. And I'm thinking here of two beloved women friends, a mother and daughter who died late last year, both far too young. The mother knew her time was coming. Both mother and daughter were elegant, beautiful women, and to the last they maintained that, which was not superficial. It was part of them, part of how they kept their family afloat to celebrate birthdays, graduations, and more, separating that backstage reality and managing to put on what the Italians call figura, a face for the town, is brave indeed. And here's a poem, wonderful poem, on what figura does by Kirriemuir-based poet Nicky Robson. Nicky is originally from County Tyrone, and I wish I could read it with her beautiful voice. Single mother. In the shower, I buckle under the burden, lie in its close womb, where water patters a steady heartbeat, coats like vernix. At the end of the school day, when the kids come chattering in, I will find my mummy smile in my makeup bag and paint it on. Backstage. We need to go back to Siena. Well, we really do. I have an imagined narrative poem which niggles me periodically. I'd really like to have been backstage at the Colle Sanese town planners meeting when they had to approve the designs for their cathedral. There they are, amongst those Mearns red fields. Already there's a maze of medieval buildings in that matching stone, harmonious, gentle. Then the architect brings in drawings for the cathedral. Oh yes, stripy, black and white marble. And it's a licorice all sorts sort of moment at the top of the calm of the town. That must have been some meeting. That backstage moment deserves a naughty poem, I'm sure. Of course, they did approve the plan, and it's unimaginably beautiful, perfect. Skipping forward a few centuries, back again to my own first visit to the city, a CNE's art lecturer described the then fairly recent renovations to the cathedral. Somewhere in the rafters, and he actually pointed to the site, a purse had been found with a letter, which seems almost too good to be true. It had been left there by one of the building's original stonemasons. His letter told of how privileged he felt to work on this wonderful Duomo. And he wanted to hide this purse of coins so that the person finding it could share some of his joy. Those few coins were worth the proverbial fortune, of course, when they were found. And perhaps that's a perfect example of one of those acts of subversive kindnesses. Someone working in the shadows and hiding his generosity backstage for later emergence and delight. Likewise, my friend Maureen Crosby, check out her wonderful stained glass at Gallus Glass online, was teaching art at a rural primary many years ago and found someone had raided the art cupboard for her projected lesson, which was then off. And that's a big hazard of the peripatetic teaching service. So she utilised the unsold books from a sale that had been held that weekend at the school and taught the children about the poetry library sculptures. She introduced them to various paper manipulation techniques, and she tells me the kids absolutely flew with it. But they came back to her later and said in hushed voices, "But our sculptures aren't really finished. Like the poetry library ones, we need to hide them and give them away. So we're thinking about putting them in, and that's their secret." So here's to those wonderful pupils and their resourceful teacher. So we've had a wee moment to shine a light on the backstage. And thank you for staying with me through the ages, places, and people. We won't be in Italy next month, despite its own riches in my March subject matter. That's all I'm prepared to say for now. I hope you'll find something backstage for your poems. I wish I could share with you some fortifying coffee and panforte, but that may be another time. Thank you.